Okay, so good day or good evening to all our viewers, wherever you may be. Hope all of you are doing well and in good spirits as we expectantly welcome the waning of the pandemic, crossing our fingers. My name is June Colmenares, and I will be your MC for today's event. On behalf of the officers and members of the Knights of Rizal Aloha chapter, I would like to welcome all of you to the first lecture of part 2 of our Rizalian lecture series. I especially welcome my fellow Knights of Rizal, as well as our friends from the Philippines and Australia. The primary goal of the Knights of Rizal is to educate people on the life, works, and ideas of our national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal. And this lecture series is one way by which our chapter endeavors to do its part. Before we proceed, I would like to remind our participants that the lecture will be for 40 minutes and will be immediately followed by a 20-minute video titled General Rizal. This will be followed by a 10-minute reaction. There will be a Q&A session after the reaction, and we will entertain both written questions in our chat space as well as live questions. I would like to remind everybody to mute your microphones when you are not speaking. I now call on Sir Dr. Fred Magdalena, Knight of Rizal, to introduce our guest speaker. Fred?
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I am privileged to introduce a friend who I have not met for the last 20 years or so. And he has been quite active, not only in the field of academics, but also in cinema, video making, and directing film. Our speaker is actually a multidisciplinary person who has obtained degrees in various fields, ranging from a PhD in political science at the University of Hawaii, including an MA in anthropology from the same university. And for his undergraduate degree, he got a BA in philosophy from the University of the Philippines in Diliman, as well as a diploma in community services and other academic engagements. He's well known for his publications, and I can mention the most important one, which was published about Rizal, entitled A Nation Aborted, Rizal, American Hegemony and Philippine Nationalism, which was published by the Ateneo de Manila University in 2008. He has had other publications as well, but something that is quite related to Rizal was his introduction to a critical edition of Rizal's El Filibusterismo, which is published by Vival Publishing in Manila last year. And the title of this, his commentary or introduction is El Filibusterismo, a cautionary tale for the 21st century. Our speaker, as I have mentioned, is a multidisciplinary person, not only in his endeavor to achieve a degree, but also in teaching what he has learned. In fact, he listed 29 various undergraduate and graduate courses that he had taught over the years, starting from the University of the Philippines all the way to the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and also in other universities in the Philippines, teaching various courses, political science, cinema and dramatics, and even languages at the UH Department of Languages, Linguistics, and Literatures. He also directed a number of films and um, um, I would say movies, which he showed at the University of Hawaii, courtesy of the um, University of Hawaii Peace Institute or Matsunaga Peace Center. He also directed some advertising videos for large restaurants, not only in Hawaii, but also in the Philippines, including ZPs. I want to see how this video looked like, but that was a long time ago. And so it may not be available anymore. Our speaker also spent a great deal of time teaching and doing films in Sydney, Australia. In fact, that's where he wrote most of or directed most of his films until he decided to retire from the University of the Philippines Asian Center and founded a Sydney-based research institute for sustainable alternatives in Australia. Now that he is retired, he focuses his efforts on doing scholarly works, giving lectures on various subjects, ranging from Rizal, Philippine history, even voyaging in the Pacific. One of these lectures he gave to us at the Nights of Rizal. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to give you Dr. Floro Quibuyen.
Hello. Good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon to my friends here in Sydney. Maybe good evening to, is it now evening in Hawaii?
Almost.
Yes.
And good morning. I think it's not yet 12, is it? To our friends in the Philippines. Just to edit a bit what my good friend Fred said. Most of the films I made were actually made in the Philippines, but many of the more mature ones I did were made in Hawaii. And to add to what he said, I directed 2 episodes in a major TV network in the Philippines. And my last project, in fact, was an aborted project, which I can explain later. It was supposed to be Mariang Makiling, and it was supposed to star. It was supposed to be a major TV movie starring at that time the recently crowned Binibining Filipinas, Dang Cecilio. Something happened and it did not push through, but that would have been my last project. The producer said I can still produce it, but I was given an option. Do I become a director, movie producer, filmmaker in the Philippines? At that time, I was given the option of pursuing a graduate work at the University of Hawaii. So between filmmaking and academic work at the University of Hawaii, I chose the latter. I don't know if that was the right choice, but here I am. Had I chosen being the director, I might be something important now, but instead I chose to be an academic, and so I'm still obscure up to this point. Now I worked on this for the whole night, last night, and I hope I can do it in 40 minutes, but maybe it might extend to 50 minutes, so bear with me because I'm covering 3 decades of Philippine history, three of the most important decades, 3 of the defining decades of the Filipino nation. So I'll try to be fast with respect to other items and dwell on a few items that I consider very important. Now, the period of the 18th, 19th century can be said to be a period of turmoil, and these 2 centuries could be said to be a period of turmoil and upheaval. It was marked by a series of revolutions, earth-shaking revolutions, which changed the world and world history forever. And it also marked the decline of the Spanish Empire and the decline of the Spanish monarchy, which the whole thing started in the United States, the War of Independence of the Americans against the British Empire in 1776. This was followed by the French Revolution, 1789, and then the revolution in Haiti, in which slaves led by Toussaint Louverture overthrew the French regime, ended slavery, and created the new nation called Haiti. Haiti is an Arawak word, an indigenous word. Then, of course, everybody knows about Simon Bolivar, who led revolutions against Spanish rule and therefore liberated the area that we now that now comprises Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. And then this was followed in the Mexican War of Independence, 1810 to 1821. So by the 1830s, all of the Spanish colonies in Latin America have achieved independence, except Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Marianas, and the Philippines. But the Spanish Empire was also threatened in the Philippines in the late 60s. This actually marks the beginning of the Filipino nationalist movement. The Glorious Revolution of 1868 overthrew Queen Isabella. And this period, 1868 to 1878, also saw the beginning of the Cuban War of Independence against Spain, and which lasted 10 years. So the 3 decades that I'm going to focus on, 1860s to the 1890s, began as a spring of hope. The tide of change was in the air, but ended in the tragedy of the American conquest at the turn of the century, in which 500,000 Filipinos died. During this period, amidst epidemics, catastrophes, violence, and wars, one family stood out for its fortitude, heroism, compassion, and nobility: the Rizal family. Now, if you were a person living at that time, you'd be confronted with a period that can be characterized only by one word: crisis. The Chinese have a way of describing what crisis is all about. In their character, Wei Ji, Wei stands for threat or danger, and Ji stands for opportunity. So crisis is a time of danger, but also a time of opportunity. The Christian tradition has a term for this. It's called kairos, a term that Korean filmmakers used as a title for their TV series, which I recommend to my viewers. The title is Kairos. And the theme of this TV series, made by a Korean production, is crisis, opportunity, and decision. Crisis presents danger, but also opportunity. But whether that danger, that crisis turns into opportunity instead of danger depends on what choices we make. And so the emphasis on the TV series is decision. The decisions that we make will spell the difference between whether the crisis turns into danger and catastrophe or opportunity and change. And when one is confronted with crisis, Rizal made this clear in his work Noli and Fili. There are several choices open to individuals. Suffering, injustice can lead to four typical responses. One is self-destruction or isolation. In the case of Sisa, she was driven to madness. Julie was driven to suicide. Capitan Tiago was driven to opium. Maria Clara ran to the nunnery and isolated herself, only to be subjected to the sexual abuse of Padre Salvi and eventually dying also. The other choice was a choice done by Cabe-Santales, which is destructive violence. Kill all the people that you think are responsible for your misfortune, the people who subjected you to colossal injustice and unbearable suffering. And the same thing happened with Ibarra. He became Simon, the terrorist. Another choice is to deny, to deny that something wrong is going on and try to make the most of the situation, accommodate yourself, and that's Basilio. A fourth option is creative, constructive engagement, solidarity with the people who are suffering from injustice, and try to make things better or create a new society. But this all depends on one's capacity for love and sacrifice and virtue. These are the only three things that, according to Father Florentino in El Filibusterismo, can lead to redemption. Elias made this clear also in the Noli Me Tangere. Alone, you cannot do anything. You'll end up self-destructing or engaging in destructive violence. Unite with the people, be in solidarity, cast your lot with the oppressed and the poor. And for Tasio, it's not love is going to be redemptive only if it is mixed with knowledge and wisdom. The family that embodied all of this creative, constructive engagement is the Rizal family. And we shall see. By the way, there is a modern 21st century Maria Clara. And like Maria Clara in the Noli Me Tangere, she joined the nunnery. She became a Carmelite. But instead of isolating herself like Maria Clara, she became more involved in environmental activism. I suppose you know who I'm talking about. She's a very pretty. Is a very pretty woman, and in her youth, she was probably one of the prettiest. She would have been perfect. In fact, she played the role of Maria Clara in one of the TV programs, and she would have been perfect for this kind of look would have been perfect for a Maria Clara character in a modern film. Do you know who I'm talking about? I'm talking about Chin Chin Gutierrez. Now let's talk about injustice. My webinar will be about the story of injustice on three levels. The first level of injustice is the injustice of the colonial system. The injustice inflicted by the colonial system on the people, which causes untold suffering. And there are a number of examples we can focus on, but I'd like to focus on, because this is typical, it illustrates all that I want to talk about colonial injustice, the Calamba Hacienda case. It was actually an agrarian conflict, and the people resisted, and that resistance was led by the Rizal family, in particular Paciano. This marks one of the contributions of Paciano in the nationalist movement. The second form of injustice is the erasure of history. And the third is a self-inflicted historical forgetting. Why is this important? It's very important because when we forget the past, when we forget what happened in the past or don't get our facts right, we are bound to repeat the same mistakes that our ancestors did. So we end up again voting for the likes of Duterte, and maybe again voting for Marcos clone, Bongbong Marcos. So we can ignore history only at our own peril. But what is the second and the third level of the third level of injustice? I won't say it now, but this is my challenge to you. At the end of the webinar, you should be able to answer that. If not, then I would have failed miserably. If you have answered it, then I would consider myself fully rewarded. So let's go, let's proceed. To understand the injustice, we have to understand how power works. Now, if you look at the 20th, 21st century, power is something that is not just exercised by the state. Actually, if you look at all major nation states now, there is always this nexus between state and corporate power, what Eisenhower referred to as the military-industrial complex. This is the revolving door between state government positions, senators, congressmen, the president, and the corporate sector. There's always a revolving door. When they retire from public office, they become CEOs, members of the board of directors of the major corporations. Likewise, generals in the military end up also becoming members of or members of the board of directors of major corporations. Now, if you apply this to the 19th century Philippines, again, it's not just the state. When we talk about injustice, it's the state-church nexus because of the principle of patronato real. And this is the notion that the state supports the church, for example, in its mission, in the building of churches, but at the same time, the church, and also in the case of the Concordat of 1953, the head of the state can actually appoint the bishop and the clergy, or veto the appointment of a particular clergy into the position of a bishop. But in exchange, the church then operates without engages in business without paying taxes. So the two work together. And of course, Marcelo F. del Pilar referred to this situation as the monastic sovereignty or the phrailocracia. You will see this happening in the history of the Philippines, starting from the tragedy of Gomez Burgos Zamora in 1872. Now, how do you picture power? The one way of depicting power, illustrating power, is what you see in the screen. Well, you see that the top, the rulers, followed by the church. So we rule you, the church fools you, and the soldiers make sure that you toe the line or you'll be shot. And of course, underneath the bourgeoisie enjoying everything, and of course, the working class. This is very simplistic, does not explain actually how power works, because in reality, the monarch, the president, the executive, and the leaders of the church and the leaders of the military and members of the bourgeoisie, what you may call now the billionaires, actually comprise one network, which we might call now the 1%, as against the 99%. Dom Hope, professor in political science in the United States, depicts this in this graph. You know, you have the billionaires, the jet setters, you have the executives in corporations, and you have the officials in the government. And the combination of these three actually is what constitutes the power elite. And these are the people who decide what to do. They decide on policy. In fact, they are the ones who decide on whether to go into war or not. The people have no say in whether a country goes to war or not. They are not consulted, but they are needed to wage the war, and they are the ones who die, of course. Rizal depicts this very well in El Filibusterismo. In chapter 11, in Los Baños, you can see there is a meeting here in Los Baños involving the priests. You can see in the background about 1, 2, 4 of them, and then you can see the Governor General, and of course you see Simon. This is exactly how power worked in the Philippines at that time. You have the church, you have the state, and you have, of course, certain rich, super rich individuals who are connected somehow with the Governor General, with the government. And we don't know this, and this is not obvious. And that's why Rizal, when he was referring to this in his Filibusterismo, he says, let us go inside and let's see what's going on. I invite you, amigos y enemigos, you know, whether you're friend or foe, let's go inside and see what's going on. And this is how Rizal illustrated how power worked in the Philippines at that time. So we shall start with the saga of a family and a nation which begins in Laguna. And you see at that time, 19th century, Laguna was a very green place. And you go to Laguna now, you'll be surprised it's all full of subdivisions and tall buildings. Gone are the rice fields, the sugar canes, and of course the greenery. But this was not the case in Rizal's time. Now, if you see the map, when you talk about the Dominicans, the Dominican priors here would be equivalent to what I call the corporations today. They were the rich, powerful corporations at that time who can actually influence the government. So, for example, in the case of, they were the biggest landowners. In the case of the Dominicans, just focusing on Laguna, their estate extended from Binyan. Actually, they own Silang too. Silang, when you speak of the Calamba estate, actually at that time, it covered Binyan, Santa Rosa, Cabuyao, Calamba, and Los Baños. Calamba alone comprised about 16,000 hectares. And you know what 16,000 hectares is? It's about the size of Quezon City. If you're familiar with the size of Quezon City, that's how large the Dominican hacienda is. And of course, in a town called Calamba, the most prominent family were the Rizals. Now, what you see here is a rebuilt house. The original actually had been destroyed, and I will explain how it happened. This is not the original house, but it was rebuilt following the exact architectural specifications of the original house. And they tried to also use exactly the adobe, I mean, the avocado color for the house. But it's a huge house because after all, there were how many? 10 sisters, 2 brothers, and 2 parents. So about 14 people lived in this house. It has to be large. When we talk about the struggle in the Philippines, we have to focus on land. And that's why land ownership was very crucial, and the Dominican corporations played a very important part here. All corporations, in fact, because they were the landowners. And the whole, it's hardly talked about now. In fact, it's not even in textbooks. The whole thing started in a very major conflict in the 18th century, 1741 to 45, in Silang, Cavite, and it involved the Dominicans. Again, it was an issue of land grabbing, and the farmers lost their land. The land that where their carabaos used to graze, where they used to collect food, was enclosed and became an hacienda. All of a sudden, they found themselves excluded and landless. And all they could do now is to become tenants of the Dominican order. And that led to an uprising, which is hardly talked about now. And you won't even see it in textbooks. But 1830s to 1860s marked an economic boom. It marked the rise in the global price of sugar. And so when Rizal was born in 1861, that was at the height, at the peak of the economic boom. It explains the prosperity of the Rizal family, because they were involved in sugar production, although the land was not owned by them. They were paying rent to the Dominicans who owned the land, but they were the ones producing sugar. And this issue of land haciendas again exploded in the 1860s, 1872. So one of the people involved here is Father Jose Burgos. Very few people know, and you look at the history books, they talk about Burgos wanting secularization, equality between the regular priests and the secular priests like Father Burgos. What is omitted in this discussion is the fact that the main goal of Burgos, one of the major things that Burgos called for was to deprive of the corporations of their rich haciendas and give this to the Filipinos. And I think that was the main reason why he was executed, brutally executed, together with two other priests, which was witnessed by Paciano Rizal. And then something happened in the 1880s. The sugar price collapsed, and compounded by the cholera epidemic and other natural disasters. And so by 1887, the people didn't have money to pay rent. And because they couldn't pay rent, they were evicted. And this is the Calamba Hacienda agrarian conflict, in which Paciano, the Rizal family, figured. And it was a turning point. In fact, we can say it was a prelude to the Philippine Revolution. It was remembered by Bonifacio de Katipunan. And what was the response of the Rizal family? What was the response of Rizal and Paciano? Well, instead of engaging in violence like Cabezantales, they engaged in creative resistance and struggle to create a new nation, which was born in the period 1892 to 1896. If you look at the participation of Burgos, of Paciano and Jose, Paciano was involved in the movement for about 40 years. Rizal was involved in the movement, we say, had a very short life, for only about 14 years. And yet, all that we know about is about Rizal. You know, Rizal is everywhere. He's required reading. Several TV shows have been made about his life, movies. He's everywhere. But Paciano is nowhere. And yet, if you look at Paciano's contribution, he was involved in the Burgos-led secularization movement. He was, in fact, a founding leader of a student movement at that time called Juventud Escolar Liberal. And then he dropped out of the UST, I'll explain later, to concentrate on managing the Calamba farm and sugar business. At that time, Rizal goes to school and to Ateneo and UST. He writes a very important work, which is hardly talked about. I will be talking about this on Wednesday at my webinar the University of the Philippines, Manila, Junto al Pasig, but I want to talk about it now here. In 1882, 1887, that's a very significant period too, because this was the time when Paciano and Rizal had a private, secret pact between two brothers. I'll explain this later on. And of course, this marked the first sojourn of Rizal, which everybody knows about. But the next one, 1887 to 1891, that was a very important period involving the Calamba Hacienda case. And Paciano, again, was the central character here. He was the lawyer for the farmers. They actually fought it out in the courts. Eventually, they lost. And what happened? All the leaders of these farmers' resistance were arrested. Paciano and his father were deported to Mindoro. And on the other hand, Rizal was in Europe, writing his El Filibusterismo, doing his research and all that. But the one who really was in the brunt of the struggle was Paciano. And in 1891 to 1896, he was in fact exiled in Jolo. But after 7 months, he is released. He goes back to Calamba, rebuilds the farm, sugar business. And then actually gets involved with the Katipunan, organizes for the Katipunan and joins Bonifacio in Cavite. In the meantime, Rizal launches the La Liga, is arrested promptly, goes to the Pitan as a deportee, and ends up being executed in 1896. That's the end of Rizal. We won't hear any more about Rizal from then on, except from the lips of the Katipunan, who worshipped him. But 1896 to 1898, Paciano was in the thick of the revolutionary struggle. He was working hand in hand with Jacinto in the KKK. And then under Aguinaldo, he became a brigadier general. In fact, one of the few triumphs we had in the revolution was thanks to Paciano. He liberates Calamba on June 2, 1898. And it's surprising that this is never celebrated. It's not an official holiday. It's not even commemorated by the National Historical Institute. And it's not even talked about and celebrated and commemorated in any universities. But this is a very significant event. The liberation of Calamba by Paciano. And after that, he continues fighting against the Americans. Of course, he ends up being arrested. But did he give up? No, he continued by forming the Junta de Agricultores. This is a survey of what Paciano was involved in. I don't think I can go through it. To go through all of this in detail would take me probably a whole week. And this one, just writing about this will probably require a whole book. So I think I'll just focus on the Calamba Hacienda case and the aftermath of the Calamba Hacienda case. I will skip this. I've already talked about this. The Dominicans took over the farmers' lands. The people went to court. They won. But then the Dominicans appealed to the Supreme Court, the Audiencia Real in Intramuros, which decided in their favor. And so they lost the land. Of course, the Dominicans celebrated this with comedians, fireworks, ringing of church bells, stage plays, as the people of Silang seethed with indignation. A Jesuit priest who knew what was going on said by Lent of 1745, all the orders in the Philippines, meaning Dominicans, Recollects, Augustinians, except the Society of Jesus, were craving for lands when they should have been pleading for heaven. The Jesuits were the only ones who were not involved in land grabbing. And no wonder that Rizal had a soft spot for them. And it was mutual. The Jesuits had a soft spot for Rizal. Well, this was in Silang, and history would repeat itself in the late 19th century in the Kalambasian, the case of 1887, 1890, 1891. Now I'll skip this. This was when De La Torre arrived in 1869. And because he was a liberal, remember at this time, the monarchy had been overthrown. So the new Republican government sent a liberal governor, Carlos Maria de Torre, and this encouraged the open activism of the Filipinos, which consisted of two groups. The old ones, the professionals, the lawyers, the professors, who were all Filipinos, and the priests led by Burgos, were members of the what they call Comité de Reformadores. They advocated for Filipinization, the equality between Filipinos and Spaniards, and in the case one of the platforms of Burgos was exactly the resolving the problem, the haciendas controlled and owned by the Dominican friars. And corresponding to that is the group of students, and this was led by three people: Paciano Rizal, who was at that time a law student in UST, Felipe Buencamino, and Gregorio Santiago. And this is the three priests. You can see there. Yeah, this one, Mariano Gomez is the oldest. He was about 72. The young ones in their 30s, early 30s, were Burgos at that time, and Jacinto Zamora. Burgos is a Creole, and you can see that he's a good-looking type. If I were a director now and would make a film about this event, this is the guy I would choose, or at least this is the kind of look I will look for as an actor, this guy. And you can see the semblance between him and Father Burgos. So what happened? Cut the story short, Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora were executed by Garrote. The leading members of the Comité de Reformadores, 21 of them, were deported to Guam. And they consisted of 10 Filipino priests, 6 lawyers, 4 businessmen. One professor of UST, Professor of Paciano, Joaquin Pardo de Sabera, was also exiled. And his wife, who was not actually part of the group of deportees, wanted to join her husband, and so he became part of the Filipinos deported to Guam. I'm talking about Doña Gertrudes Guricho. 3 Masons were actually identified as the plotters of the Cavite Mutiny, whose goal actually was to establish an independent republic, and they were Masons. This came out only recently through the study of Father Schumacher, and their names are Enrique Peraiso, Maximo Inocencio, and Crisanto de los Reyes. Now, this is the mystery here. They were identified, Governor General Weyler knew, rather Izquierdo knew that they were actually the plotters. But they were not executed. They were exiled in Africa. So this is a big question. Why were the real plotters, identified as the real plotters, simply deported? Whereas Gomburza, the 3 priests who were not involved in any in the mutiny at all, were executed. I have no time to discuss this, but The Ilustrados in Rizal's time knew why. I can explain later. So 1869 to 1872 was a horrible year for the Rizal family, especially consider how the whole thing would have looked to Jose at that time. He was a very young person. Paciano was about to graduate from UST as a lawyer, but he had to drop out. The three leaders of the student movement, this is what happened to them. Paciano drops out, becomes a gentleman farmer. Gregorio Santiago drops out too, another schoolmate, but decides to go to Spain and becomes the first Filipino to ever attain the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in jurisprudence. And he becomes the first Filipino political economist. In fact, his work on the economic development of the country under the Spanish period became a major source of Rizal in his, especially in his essay La Indolencia de los Filipinos. Buen Camino, you're familiar with, especially if you have seen the movie General Luna. He continues with his law studies and ends up becoming a lawyer. And in fact, ends up becoming later on a lawyer for the Rizals in the Calamba Hacienda case. And in the case of Jose Rizal, he enrolls in the Ateneo. What about the Rizal sisters? By the time Rizal left, Jose Rizal left for Spain, of course, they had an agreement, as a kind of secret pact, Paciano and Rizal. And what that secret pact would be, what the secret pact was all about, would become clear only later on. If you fast forward to the 1890s, what was that pact all about? And in the case of the Rizal sisters, it's very important to note there were about 10 of them. Saturnina was already married when Rizal left. She was married to Hidalgo. Narcisa got married when Rizal was in Europe to Antonino Lopez. Olympia got married to Ubaldo. Lucia got married to Herbosa. Maria, the great grandmother of our friend Gemma Cruz Saraneta, married in 1886 Daniel Cruz. I don't know if Gemma would want me to talk about this. Their marriage lasted about 5 years. They separated later, but I leave it to Gemma if she wants to elaborate on this. So at that time, when Rizal left, the youngest sisters were Josepa, Trinidad, and Soledad, 12 years old. Soledad later on became Soledad Quintero. I don't know if Jopen Quintero is listening now. She's a direct descendant of Soledad.
Dr. Quibuyen,
Yep.
I am Jose Noel Mendoza. I belong to the Soledad Malvar
good.
family.
Okay, good.
Thank
Good
you.
to know. Good to know. And look at Josepa and Trinidad. They were very young at that time. These were the only sisters who did not get married. But they became leading members of the Katipunan. And the daughter of Lucia, Delfina Herbosa, became a leading member of the Katipunan. And Narcisa, her daughter Angelica, also became a member of the Katipunan. So 4 members of this family, plus Paciano, so 5 actually, 5 became members of the Katipunan. So this was the contribution of the family: Rizal, a martyr; Paciano, a revolutionary general; and the sisters and nieces, members of the Katipunan. And Paciano, when Rizal left, he concentrated on taking care of the sugarcane. In fact, he was helped by Mariano Herbosa. They would actually work Monday to Sunday. And Monday to Saturday, they were in the fields. They would only rest, go home on Sundays, but they were sleeping in the sugar cane fields. It was a very hard life, but Paciano did it so that he can support his brother. Without that support, Rizal would not have been able to do his studies abroad. And I don't know if I have time to read this. Rizal writes to his brother, and he says, I don't stay at home except on Sundays to attend to the people. I spend the other days in the mountain. You must not fail to write, though, whenever you have an opportunity to do so. I finished milling on the 18th of this month, and in spite of the low price of sugar, I'm very much satisfied for having finished this work, because at last I can rest at home after having spent 5 months away from it. It is true that this rest will not be for more than a couple of months, after which I shall have to attend to the preparations for the coming harvest. After all, it is 2 months of relaxation from work. Our harvest was more than ordinary. What does this say? The only time Paciano could rest actually was 2 months in 1 year. The rest of the time he had to work, be in the fields. This is the kind of sacrifice he did for Rizal and for his family, because he was the one, now the one managing the family business. Okay, 1883, Rizal was already 1 year in abroad. What happens? Well, cholera epidemic rages the country, and the record, official record, could have been more, was 34,000 Filipinos died. I don't know how many Filipinos have died in the COVID pandemic, but this one, which lasted only 1 year, less than a year actually, from August to November, caused the death of 34,000. And a lot of hundreds actually died in Calamba too. I'll give you a secret. I'll tell you later on why the Rizal family did not suffer from this epidemic. And the solution was very scientific, based on medical knowledge. 1883, as if the cholera epidemic was not enough, came another epidemic, a very, very epidemic. Again, as if that was not enough, you had hurricanes which flooded the streets of Manila and Calamba, locust infestation. Of course, this led to the destruction of sugar and rice crops. And on top of that, globally, something for which Paciano had no control was the decline in the global price of sugar. And just to show you the global price of sugar, you can see here, 1861 marked the point where the price of sugar was highest. This was the time Rizal was born. This was the economic boom in the Philippines, but then it went down in the 1880s and to rise again in 1920. But the low point was the 1880s. And this coincided with the Calamba Hacienda case. What am I leading to? Well, we are getting into that now. So we are now focusing on 1887 to 1891, the Calamba Hacienda agrarian conflict, seemingly a repeat of the Silang agrarian conflict. August 5 to February 3, 1887 to 1888, Rizal returns to Calamba, spends 6 months, and gets involved in a very important event at that time, which I'll talk about lately. But this was all the time when the farmers were started groveling about what was happening, because their profit was down, but the Dominicans kept demanding, kept raising taxes, and kept, imposing arbitrary taxes on practically everything. Whatever they did, every time they had an opportunity to raise taxes, they would raise. The taxes were not just for the land. Anything that they did on the land was taxed. And on top of that, the receipts were not issued. They had to pay, but they did not receive any receipts. So there was this growing conflict. And then it happened that at that time, by the late 1887, the government formally asked the Calamba Town Council to determine whether there had been an increase in the products and size of the Dominican estate over the past 3 years, and to submit a report. So they were asked to submit a report because we wanted to know, the government wanted to know whether the produce of the hacienda was increasing, because they were paying the same amount of tax. They were saying, oh, we were not making money. So they were paying the same amount of tax to the government. And the government wanted to find out. Now, Paciano organized the community, and it fell on Rizal and Paciano to gather information. And true enough, they came up with a report detailing everything that was going on. And 50 inquilinos signed, and it was also signed by a representative from the Dominican estate. The report details the issues raised by the farmers: arbitrary increases in land rent, arbitrary taxes on so many things, non-issuance of receipts for payment made by farmers, and the ones issued were unsigned. So receipts were not being given, but even if receipts were being given, they were not signed. And there was the lack of clarity as to Dominican estate's exact boundaries. So they were claiming, you know, this is part of the Dominican estate, but some farmers were saying, look, our ancestors have been tilling this land even before you came here. How come now it's owned by you? So there was a lot of conflict, and Rizal encouraged the farmers to submit a petition. He drafted the petition based on the report, and they were asking the government to intervene in the conflict between the inquilinos, the farmers who produce sugar, and the Dominican order, to determine the exact extent of the land and to set a fair amount of tax to be paid, adjusted to the fact that the global price of sugar has gone down. All right, that was a fair demand. It was just a petition based on the report. And the Dominican can respond, of course. The government can order the Dominican, or the government can order the Dominicans to say, well, this is the report, this is the petition, what is your response? Is this true? And the government should be able to determine what's going on and try to mediate and come up with a fair solution. But what was the response of the Dominicans? They sued the petitioners for non-payment of their land rents and thus for evictions. Instead of responding to the petition and to the report, they sue the petitioners. And what does the government do? The government sides with the Dominicans. That is the crazy part of it. And these are the Dominicans at that time. And look at their wards, their muchachos and the Dominicans. Now, keep this in mind, the Dominicans in the Philippines in the 19th century. Just for context and comparison, there are pictures like this in Africa with showing the Catholic missionaries in Africa. And look at this carefully and compare it to this picture. This is the photo of the missionaries in Africa. Do you see a similarity or some striking contrast? These two pictures should tell you a lot. Anyway, Rizal by 1888 is out of the picture. He returns, he was compelled, actually pressured by his parents and by the governor of the province to leave, because the priors are now very angry with the Rizals, not only because of the Dominican Hacienda case, but also because Rizal's knowledge is getting distributed, circulated, and so it was condemned by the Archbishop, actually. But Rizal didn't want to leave. He wanted to marry Juno Rivera, his sweetheart, but his family said, for your own safety, please leave. And so Rizal departs reluctantly in 1888. Now, this is the first description and only description of Paciano from any Filipino that I can think of. And this is how Rizal describes, Jose Rizal describes his brother to Blumentritt. You know, Blumentritt was his best friend and confidant. And this is how he wrote, you who love to get to know good men, he wrote to Blumentritt, would find in Paciano the noblest of all Filipinos. My friend Jose Tabiel de Andrade, a lieutenant in the Spanish army, who was a friend of Rizal, said he is the only man in the Philippines. This is coming from a Spaniard. The only real man in the Philippines, the young Filosofong Tasio. And then Rizal says, when I reflect on him, I find him, even though an Indio, much more magnanimous and noble than all the Spaniards put together. Imagine this description of Jose about his brother. And it was said in confidence in a confidential letter to Blumentritt. How many Filipinos know this? Let me proceed. So Paciano becomes the lawyer for the Rizals and the farmers in the Calamba Municipal Hall in March 1888. They win the case, but the Dominicans appeal to the Court of First Instance. This time, the Dominicans win the case. Paciano appeals the ruling. Paciano appeals the ruling of the Court of First Instance in Laguna, in Santa Cruz, Laguna, to the Audiencia Real in Intramuros. And this time, Paciano asked his former schoolmate, UST schoolmate Felipe Bencamino, to act as lawyer. And what was the response of Bencamino? He says, my good friend and classmate, former classmate, there is no way you can win this case against the Dominicans. There has been no case in which the government will agree, will make a Filipino and the Indios win over the Spaniards. So best thing we can do is to come up with a deal. And he has connections. So he comes up with a compromise. By the way, by this time, the Dominicans were so angry that they started persecuting the Rizals. Hidalgo was deported to Bohol. Mariano Herbosa died of cholera in 1889 and he was refused burial. And his irrigated lands were confiscated. Herbosa is the father of Delfina, who would become a member of the Katipunan. Now, what was the deal arrived at by Bencamino? Well, the Dominicans agreed that this is what they said. Okay, we will cede the ownership of the lands in the town proper where your house belongs. So you can, you don't have to pay for that. That town is about 2,400 hectares, valued at 100,000 pesos. And number two, whatever you have paid for that area, which we are now giving up, will be remitted. But in exchange, you should not question and you should accept for good our ownership of the rest of the hacienda. Now, another attorney Hilaan, pleaded to Don Francisco, accept that this is the best term you can ever get. But what was the response of Francisco? Never would I resort to such vileness. And when the Paciano and Jose Rizal were consulted, they said, the only way we can accept this is that if it is made good to all the farmers in Calamba, not just to the Rizals. You want to offer that as that deal, you offer it to all of the families in Calamba. If not, we can never accept it. And so, Paciano comes up with a counter proposal. He said, why don't, it's an appeal to the government. Survey the land, determine the exact boundary of the Calamba hacienda case. What falls outside of that should not be taxed. And whatever taxes have been paid for that area that's outside the boundary should be remitted. On top of that, farmers like us, the Rizals, no, who could afford to buy the land, should be allowed to buy the land so that they can own the land. And the government should assist in drafting a new contract based on guarantee a fair tax rate based on what is legally owned by the Dominicans. Fair enough, Dominicans reject the proposals. Was Paciano right? Yes, because the Americans, when they came, did a survey of the Calamba Hacienda case and they found out the following. The original area owned by the Dominicans was 16,424 hectares. Now, in 1905, when the Americans did the survey, the Dominican order had claimed ownership of 18,501.8694 hectares. In other words, there was an increase of 2,078 hectares. Now, to give you an idea what that is, the University of Hawaii Manoa campus, where I graduated, is 130 hectares in size. If you divide 2,079 hectares by 130 hectares, you will have 16 US campuses. That is the amount of land that was land grabbed by the Dominicans that originally did not belong to them. Cabesan Tales was right. The story of Cabesan Tales. Paciano was right. The Calambeños were right in saying, look, you are demanding taxes on land that actually did not belong to you. This was never settled. Why? Because the government sided with the Dominicans. And Paciano wrote to his brother, he said, you know, you are advising us not to pay taxes on as a matter of principle. The point Paciano tells Jose is that we simply don't have the money to pay. It's not just a question of whether we should pay or not. It's a question of we don't have the money to pay. And the Dominicans we were asking for receipts. We are asking for the title of deeds. The Dominicans should show us exactly what they owned, but the Dominicans refused. And the argument of the Dominicans in court was this. Nowadays, you call this argument the estoppel. The Dominicans said, look, you have been paying us tax. The fact that you have been paying us tax for so many decades now proves that you have acknowledged our ownership over the land. And therefore, we don't have to prove anything because you have already acknowledged it. What more do we have to prove? And if you cannot pay, then we have the legal right to evict you. Do you know, my good friends listening to me now, that this argument was upheld by a Jesuit, Father Schumacher, who actually scolded me for claiming that the Hacienda case was a case of injustice. He said the Dominicans had the right. Really? Let us proceed. What was the effect of the Calamba Hacienda case? Well, remember that it happened on top of natural disasters and in the wake of natural disasters and cholera epidemic and beriberi. And Paciano writes to Rizal again, after the fever that wrought havoc here and still continues paralyzing in a certain way the farm work for lack of workmen. Now we have a worse sickness, insanity. It drove people to madness, which, although it does not have the proportions of an epidemic, already has claimed a number of victims. Albino, Cune, our sister Narcisa, and several poor ones are victims of it. So Narcisa was a victim too. He became mad, just like what happened to Sisa. Fortunately, it was not a permanent madness. He eventually recovered. And Paciano says, our sister is being treated with mustard plasters and at present seems to be improving. If this is not effective, we are going to resort to hydrotherapy treatment, you know, the warm spring baths in Los Baños. So the first to be evicted was Don Francisco and the Rizal family. They were actually forcibly taken out of their houses, and all their furniture were thrown on the streets. And so that was the first phase of the eviction in August 14, 1890. 78-year-old Francisco and 64-year-old Doña Chudora were forced out of their house. All their furniture and material possessions were thrown out of the house for all to see. And on top of that, Paciano Rizal, Antonino Lopez, the husband of Narcisa, Leandro Lopez, the son of Antonino, Silvestre Ubaldo, brother-in-law, Mateo Elihorde, a relative, 5 of them were deported to Mindoro. So eviction, the Dominicans were not satisfied with eviction. The ringleaders had to be deported. That was not enough. There came a second phase. In the second phase, 300 families were evicted. Narcisa again reports to Rizal. More than 300 families have been despoiled of all their lands, homes, animals, and crops, of sugar, rice, and other fruits of their labor. The act of eviction was very painful. The authorities, the justice of the peace, the lieutenant with 2 or 3 pairs of civil guards, and the judge of first instance were all there to take over everything that the evicted owns. And they were actually forcibly taken out violently. One of them, Narcisa was saying, lost 2 teeth as a result of the blow he received on the mouth from the butt of a gun. There were others who at times fell unconscious because of such dreadful punishment. Narcisa says, it's a long letter, but I'm just citing to you some excerpts. In view of these ferocious abuses, the unfortunate ones were almost without means to earn their daily bread. So she's concerned with others. You know, what will happen to the others? Believe me, if this outrage continues, Calamba is going to die. And then she says, the well-to-do can move to other towns. That's what the Rizals did. You know, they moved to the birthplace of Doña Chudora, and her birthplace is Tondo. So they resettled to Tondo. But then Narcisa says, see how concerned she is with other people. But those who can't naturally will suffer. They will suffer poverty, hunger, and all kinds of calamities or death. The concern with others, you know, that's very Rizalian. Thinking not only what's happening to their family, but also what will happen to other people. The third phase, this time 300 artillerymen, 200 cavalrymen, 100 native soldiers. Not just evict, but demolish the houses, because it was reported that some were surreptitiously returning to their houses. So that they can't return anymore, demolish their houses. And not satisfied with that, November 13, 1891, the governor of Manila and the governor general ordered the deportation to the island of Wolof 25 residents. The reason for opposing not only the Dominicans, but also the Spanish domination in the Philippines. The colony left unchecked will soon plunge into a revolution. What opposing are you talking about? How did the whole thing start? It was a petition for a fair deal in terms of taxes, a petition to determine exactly how it was owned by the Dominicans. Is that opposing the Dominican order and the Spanish domination of the country? But that was how it was seen. So 25 residents were deported to Jolo, November 14, but the results managed to evade arrest. More on this later. Don Francisco, Don Paciano, Silvestre Ubaldo were supposed to be deported to Jolo from Mindoro, but they managed to escape with the help of an underground organization which called itself the Partido Rizalino. And they were able to escape, hide in the house of a Chinese businessman, Martin Zamosa, who was later on arrested for doing that. And they managed to escape in Hong Kong, where they joined Jose Rizal. More on that later. On top of that, Teodoro Alonso was arrested, and for what reason? Rizal writes to Blumentritt again. Rizal's confidant was Blumentritt. You know, he says they sent her from Manila to Santa Cruz. Can you imagine the distance from Manila to Santa Cruz? By mountain road, going from town to town, because she did not identify herself as Realonda de Rizal, but simply as Teodora Alonso. What a ridiculous charge. Imagine an old woman of more than 64 going up and down mountain roads with her daughter, Josefa, guarded by constables. And so let us summarize the sequence of events. 1887, the government requests a report about what was going on in the Calamba Hacienda. They comply with that request. They submit a report. And on top of that, they submit a petition asking the government's intervention in behalf of the farmers to negotiate a fairer deal with the Dominicans. What's so subversive about that? Now, in response, the Dominican orders sue petitioners for eviction. Rather than the government investigating the whole thing, the government orders eviction, not only eviction, but the arrest and deportation of the ringleaders, the eviction of 300 families, and the deportation of 30 families. That is, if that is not a colossal case of injustice based on Dominican greed, what is that? And a Jesuit priest chided me for saying that. Now, is it true that were they justified in demanding rent? For one thing, even if the farmers wanted to pay rent, they couldn't. They didn't have the money because the price of sugar went down. And on top of that, the cholera epidemic and the natural disasters. But in the process, where was the hacienda going bankrupt? Again, it was found out that not really. In 1885, the Calamba hacienda collected 7,465 kawans of palay and earned 14,136 pesos in rents. In 1889, the hacienda collected 8,650 kawans of palay and 9,929 pesos. Thus, the Calamba hacienda was reaping profits at a time when the Calamba farmers could not earn enough to pay their rent, for which they were evicted in 1890. My friends, these things that I'm telling you now are not in history textbooks. How do I know? Because I went through the archival documents. Now, again, for global comparison, in the United States, what was the reaction of the people when they're being evicted? Remember, there was an economic crisis which is still going on to this day in America, in the United States. You know, the United States is characterized by two contradictory things. The unstoppable rise of billionaires, but at the same time, the decline of the middle class and the impoverishment of millions of Americans. So they couldn't pay their rent, they get evicted. But there is a growing resistance. And people are saying housing is a human right. Evictions are violence. Evictions are police brutality. That is what the Calamba farmers suffered. Now you look at this. So that this is part of the eviction process in the United States, or their properties are thrown out of the street. This is what happened in Calamba. You don't get this picture in any film or TV movie because nobody has done it. An episode in our history that people want to forget and avoid talking about. But what I'm showing you is a picture in the United States at present. But that picture is exactly what happened in Calamba in 1890. And so, you know, they come up with meetings on the theme evictions are state violence. That is exactly what happened in the Philippines. My God, by this time, Rizal has had enough. And he writes, for the first time, he writes in Tagalog, his native language. An open letter addressed to all the Filipinos abroad, in particular the Filipinos in Madrid. And he says, kung ang inaasahan ng ating mga kababayan ay tayo rito sa Europa, ay totoo silang namamali. Ang ating maitutulong sa kanila ay ang ating buhay sa ating bayan. Yaong kamalian ng lahat na tayo'y makatutulong dito sa malayo ay salang-salaman din. Ang gamot ay dapat ilapit sa may sakit. Ang parang ng paglalabanan ay ang Pilipinas. Doon tayo dapat magtatagpo. Doon tayo magtutulong-tulong. Doon tayo sama-samang magdusa o magtagumpay kaya. Huwag umasa ang Pilipinas sa ibang bansa. Umasa sa sariling lakas. I wonder if I have to translate this. I am assuming that most of my listeners understand Filipino. To cut the story short, Paciano, Silvestre, Francisco get reunited with Rizal in Hong Kong. Rizal writes to Maria Rizal Cruz, the grandmother of our good friend Gemma. And she writes a very touching letter. She says, matagal na totoo na hindi kita nagkakasulatan. At halos ay hindi ko na, notice that when Rizal writes to them, they write in 3 languages. They write in Tagalog and in Spanish. And with some of his compatriots, he writes in French. Not only in Spanish, but also in French, in some Italian, you know. But here, he was writing in Tagalog and he says, matagal na totoo na hindi kita nagkakasalutan. At halos ay hindi ko na malaman kung nabubuhay pa kayo at nakakaalala pa kayo sa akin. Si tatay, si Senyor Paciano, si Bestre ay narito na, awa ng Diyos. Si tatay ay tumaba at pumupula sa pisngi. Palaging masaya, lakad ng lakad, at totoong natutuwa sa Hong Kong. Malaki ang pasasalamat nila at nakarating din. Sakali si nanay ay nariyan, ihalik mo ako gayon din kay Panggoy, that is Josefa, at kay Trinidad. At sabihin mong totoong minamahal ko sila. Nasa akong magkakatipon tayong kaming lahat dito. Then he goes, then finally, Chodora, Josepa, Lucia, Trinidad arrived, you know, the mother and 3 daughters. Lucia Herbosa, Josepa, unmarried, Trinidad, unmarried. And he reports, Rizal reports to Josepa, nandito na sila. And then he learns everything. He learns from them that actually Maria had separated from Daniel Cruz. And Rizal says, dumating na sila rito, natanto ko ang lahat ng nangyari sa iyo. But you know, he had the delicadeza not to dwell on it. No, let the sister talk about it. She cares too. But then Rizal says, malaki sana ang nasa kung ikaw ay makita. Ngunit sa balita sa akin, may 3 ka ng anak at tila ako ang paririyan. Magtiis-tiis ka muna ng hirap dito sa lupa at maasahan mong sa ibang buhay ay ligaya na laang at tuwa ang iyong kakamtan. Sounds very Filipino, that one. Ang buhay natin ay maikli at ang hirap dito ay madaling lumipas. Tiisin mo ng lahat alang-alang sa ngalan mong Rizal at sa iyong mga anak. Ang balita sa akin ay ang mga anak mo raw ay totoong magaganda at matatalino. Well, the living proof of that is Gemma Cruz Araneta. Kahinawari, kaawaan din kayo ng Diyos na mag-ina. Kapag may kalungkutan, may kasiyahan. And then, but he decides to leave. He comes back, forms the La Liga Filipina, abandons his parents in Hong Kong. I don't know why he decided to do that. His parents were happy in Hong Kong. But he abandons them. Rizal goes back to Dapitan to form the La Liga Filipina, arrives in Dapitan, launches the La Liga, arrives in Manila, launches the La Liga Filipina, but promptly arrested in July 17. Of course, he will be arrested. What did he expect? But by that time, Paciano and Don Francisco decide to go back to the Philippines, thus abandoning Doña Teodora and the three sisters. And then what does Paciano do? He reports immediately to the authorities to take the place of Antonino Rizal, who had been deported to Jolo. And he says to the authorities, take me and release my brother-in-law. I'll take his place. I'll stay in Jolo. Francisco lives with Narcisa and Tondo. Paciano, thus, by July 27, Rizal was already in Dapitan. Paciano and 4 companions are deported to Jolo. So in this case, Rizal is in Dapitan. The 2 brothers are deportees. Rizal in Dapitan and Paciano in Jolo. You can imagine that Paciano's situation was worse than Rizal's situation in Dapitan. Now, these are the 2 letters that I would like Gemma and the other relatives to help me make sense of. And I hope George Señero is here to listen. This is written in Spanish, actually. And I checked the translation, and it seems correct to me. But I find it strange. This letter of Rizal to his mother. Let me read to you. Today, the 27th July, the official mail arrived and brought me a letter of my brother, that is Paciano, informing me of his departure for Jolo with 4 companions. And then he says, I commend his decision to go in place of my brother-in-law Antonino, but I don't admire him for it. Now, I don't understand this comment. I commend this decision to go in place of my brother-in-law Antonino, but I don't admire him for it. Is there something going on here? And why can he not talk about his brother, use his brother's name? Instead of saying my brother Paciano or my kuya Paciano, he says my brother, mi hermano. Why can he not refer to his brother's first name? Now he talks about Antonino. He says now that Antonino is free, he and Sisa can come over in Hong Kong, and Sisa can recover in Hong Kong. Sisa was still recovering from her illness. And she should bring along Angelica, their daughter, so that this girl can study in Hong Kong. I suggest that Josepa and Trining continue their studies in English. So Trining and Josepa became proficient in English, now that they live in the colony. And he even says, don't buy a smaller house. Stay in that big house. Now, there are so many problems here. How did he expect them to earn a living? They were dependent on him. He had a lucrative medical practice in Hong Kong. And from that medical practice, he was able to support them. They were not proficient in English, and they were only beginning to learn English. They were not employed. Who will support them? Rizal abandons them. He refers to his relatives by name, Antonino, Sisa, Tangoy, Trining, but refers to his brother, to Paciano, as my brother. Cannot even mention his name. Okay, this can initially be interpreted in so many ways. I have my own interpretation. Asuncion Lopez Bantug, who wrote a biography of Rizal, has her own interpretation. I've read them, but I can talk about this later. But this confirms this. Another letter is troubling for me. He wrote to his brother-in-law, Dalgo, tell Senor Paciano that I should like to write him. But as I have nothing to say to him that he does not know already, I abstain for the present. what on earth is going on with Jose? Why does he not want to write to Paciano? Because Paciano knows everything that he already can say. That's bullshit. For one thing, Paciano does not know what has happened to Rizal. They have not been in contact. Not only that, Paciano was a deportee in Jolo. Shouldn't Jose inquire, how are you doing, my brother, in Jolo? But he doesn't want to talk to his brother. He says, tell my brother, I cannot write to my brother. That's what he says to Hidalgo. Why? And anyway, I will reserve my judgment on that later. Rizal resettles in Tondo and link up with Bonifacio and KKK. I don't know if I should stop here at this point because there are still a lot of things that I can talk about. But let me just go straight, do it very quickly so that I can wind up so that we can watch the video. So 1893, Trinidad, Josepa, Dernices Angelica, daughter of Narcisa, Delfina, daughter of Lucia, joined the Katipunan. Now, sometime in late 1893, my estimate is this happened either on the birthday of Bonifacio, November 30, or sometime in during Christmas time, maybe December 24, 25. Gregorio de Jesus and Andres Bonifacio get married twice. First in the Catholic Church, where Bonifacio, has that portrait of wearing an ilustrado suit with tie, with bow tie, and then they get married on a secret Katipunan rites. Now, guess who inducts Gregorio de Jesus into the Katipunan? It is the Rizal sisters. In other words, they were ahead of Gregoria in the Katipunan. They were, in fact, already officers of the Katipunan. They induct Gregorio de Jesus into the Katipunan. And Josepa is the president. Angelica is the treasurer. The sisters induct Oryang, as I said, in the KKK. How old were they at that time? Trinidad was 25. Josepa was 28. Angelica and Delfina were teenagers at this time. And 1893, this is a receipt. Actually, I don't have to read it. I only want to show that there is proof, because some question me when I say this. There is proof that the Katipunan held a banquet in honor of the Rizals. This marks the formalization of the link between the Rizals and the Katipunan. And this also proves again that Paciano was involved in organizational work in the Katipunan, because in September 23, 1896, he was apprehended together with brother-in-law Antonino and Manuel, and they were arrested and questioned, but finally detained on November 13, 1896, and because they were identified as organizers of a Katipunan branch in Tondo. So this is what Paciano has been doing. He has been doing work for the Katipunan. Paciano is imprisoned and tortured at Port Santiago. I don't have to go through this. According to great grandniece Asuncion Lopez Bantog, he was severely tortured. Same thing with this is from the apo of Paciano. He was tortured. He was released when he passed out. The authorities thought he was already dead. So he was released. He was picked up by his family. Good enough, he recovered. But I think the effect of that was later on he developed TB. The reason why he died. He died of TB. Contrast. So Paciano gets arrested, never spoke anything about his brother or about the Katipunan, although he was actually involved in the Katipunan, but never revealed anything. So he was tortured and almost died. Trust that with Antonio Luna. This is not in the movie. General Luna. General Luna was arrested, but was released. You know why? Because of this. This is what he said. And this is on the official record. It is on the document. I'm not a member of the Katipunan. On the contrary, I am an informer and a loyal subject of Spain. Dr. Jose Rizal is the founder of the Katipunan and the instigator of the August 1896 uprising. So what was the reaction of the authorities? We have nailed the bastard. This is the evidence we wanted to get him, to put him out. Get rid of him forever. This is the evidence given by Antonio Luna that Rizal is the founder of the Katipunan and the instigator of the August 1896, the so-called Cryo-Pugad Lawin uprising. That is Antonio Luna for you. Now, just a side comment about Antonio Luna. Do you know, look at how this guy looks at this woman. The body language, you know, obviously Nelly Bosted is not enamored of him. Look at the body language, he's moving away. And he's looking like a dirty old man. Sorry for talking like this, but I have to make my talk more exciting and dramatic. Nelly Bosted was in love with Jose Rizal. Antonio Luna was in love with Nelly Bosted. That's another story, but I can talk about it later on. Anyway, so 29, eve of the execution, Rizal leaves his family, meets his family for the last time, his mother and sisters, and the last to show up was Josephine. But later on, they all go home in the stillness of the night. And this is very important, my good friends, because you know, there are some people now spreading the word that Rizal and Josephine got married and Rizal retracted. No, that's a fallacy. I should declare now, because this is the word of Jose Asinero, and he wrote a memoir on this, which is unpublished, but I got to know it because it is in the possession of the great-grandson. No, not the great-grandson, the grandson. George Asinero, he's a friend of mine. And this is what happened. In the stillness of the night, the Rizal family observed vigil. Jose Asinero, at that time was 15-year-old. 15-year-old former pupil of Rizal in the Pitan, writes several copies of Rizal's farewell poem. I hope people will stop calling it Mi Ultima Adios, because Mi Ultima Adios is not the title of the poem. Rizal did not put a title in it. And Mi Ultima Adios is not a good title. I will explain later. You know, it sounds redundant, you know, and unpoetic. Mi Ultimo Adios. I will explain later my preferred title, which was actually used by a Spanish scholar. The Spaniard entitled this farewell poem Despedida. I think that is a more poetic way of putting it. Despedida, Rizal's Despedida. Anyway, so he makes copies. That's why there are several copies of Rizal's poem. All along, Rizal was with Josephine the whole night. I mean, Jose Asinero was with Josephine the whole night. So what is this story about Josephine going to Port Santiago and marrying Rizal, and Rizal retracting? Josephine was, after Rizal left Port Santiago, Josephine never returned to Port Santiago. And Asinero was with him all the time, with her all the time. And what does he do the following early morning? Does he go back? Well, according to the friars, she went back early morning. That's when they got married. That's another bullshit, because Josephine Bracken, oh, by the way, this is now a photo courtesy of George, a photo of Jose Asinero, and that was in 1947 when Trining Doña Trinidad visited him, and this is Concha, the niece of Doña Tudor, and this is the family of Don Jose Asinero. Asinero graduated as an engineer and became the first governor elected twice as governor of Zamboanga. And this is the lolo of George Asinero, who is now a Rizal scholar. And look at Trining. See, even at this age, she must have looked, she must have been good looking when she was young. And anyway, this is a side comment. But finally, Rizal apparently reconciles with Paciano, and he says, now that I'm about to die, now that I'm to die, it is to you, this is in Spanish, by the way, so this is just a translation. Now that I'm to die, it is to you that I write last, to tell you how sorry I am to leave you alone in life, bearing all the burden of the family and our aged parents. I think how you have worked to give me a career. I believe that I have tried not to waste my time. My brother, if the fruit has been bitter, it has not been my fault, but the fault of circumstances. I know you have suffered a lot. I'm sorry. Finally, Rizal acknowledges his indebtedness to his brother. And, well, Paciano, Trining, and Josephine leave early morning before Rizal is executed. And they proceed to Cavite. What do they do in Cavite? They go to Bonifacio. And this is very significant. They entrust the original copy of Rizal's farewell poem to Bonifacio, not, mind you, to Aguinaldo. And instead of joining Aguinaldo's forces, they join Bonifacio's forces. This is significant. And why entrust the original copy to Bonifacio? That, again, is very significant. You can see here, not emphasized in textbooks, history textbooks, is the intimate connection between the Rizals and the Katipunan, in particular between Paciano and Bonifacio. In fact, look, Paciano gets involved with the Katipunan operations with Jacinto. He's mentioned in a letter of Jacinto. In 1897, February, March, again, he's mentioned in a letter, Bonifacio's letter to Emilio Jacinto. They talk about Paciano. And Paciano writes to Emilio Jacinto using his name PR Maitim. Now, what is PR? PR is Paciano Rizal. Maitim is the barrio in Los Baños, in Bai, a barrio in Bai, Los Baños, where Paciano has resettled. And Emilio has, this is a response to Emilio's question. Emilio was asking him, what do you know about what happened to Bonifacio in 1897? Do you know the answer of Paciano is very, very loaded. He says, sa inyong kahilingan na bigyan kayo ng detalyes tungkol sa pagkamatay ni Bonifacio, ay may rasong politika na hindi dapat ipagkatiwala sa sulat. In other words, what is he saying? I cannot say that in this letter. So Paciano knew something, but he says it's so delicate, I cannot talk about it in a letter. Now, Julio Nakpil, again, sends a letter to Paciano addressed PR Maitim in 1897. So you can see here the connection between the Katipunan, especially the Bonifacio faction of the Katipunan with Paciano. And fast forward, I don't have time to explain in detail why eventually Bonifacio agrees to a truce with the Spaniards, but that is resisted by three generals, Paciano Rizal, Miguel Malvar, and Felicissimo Hoxon. Now, the majority of actually the rest of the generals approved the pact. Paciano and Malvar dissenting, but they comply with the directive to cease fighting and return to the respective farms, which is what they did. Feliciano Hoxon defies the directive and continues fighting. So he is promptly arrested and disappeared. Now, Felicissimo Hoxon, this is not emphasized in textbooks, is the first case of salvaging by by a Filipino leader inflicted on another Filipino. Hoxon being salvaged and disappearing. So the Aguinaldo's crimes are not just with respect to Bonifacio and Antonio Luna, but also with respect to Hoxon. Now they received money from the Spain as a result of the truce, and these are the amounts that they received. You know, ranging from 5,000, 7,000, 5,000, 1,200, 5,000, 8,000. Wow! Receipt from Urbano, Lacuna, and Pio del Pilar receiving 19,000. Isabelo Artacho, 5,000. Francisco Macabulos, 14,000. Villacosta, 5,000. Novicio and his men. Delfine Escubel and his men, 4,000. Severino Taino, 2,800. Pedro Paterno, 89,500. Mariano Trias, 6,000. Dicarte, 6,000. Paciano, 300, 140, a total of 445, the smallest actually. This says a lot, you know. I suspect that Paciano never negotiated, never asked for anything. They just gave her whatever was left after they have divided the money. Paciano was not interested in getting anything, and so he ended up receiving the smallest amount. And I'm sure Paciano just distributed this to his men. That he is that type of man. But you know, this is a very touching photograph. That was when they had a funeral for Don Francisco, the patriarch of the Rizal family, who died in January 1898. Something's wrong with the photo here. It says 1989. He died in 1898. January, and Paciano was not there because Paciano was already involved in operations in the revolution, being a revolutionary general. And look at the photographs here. You have, can you see the picture very clearly? Lucia Rizal, the topmost, the top row. Narcisa Saturnina. Maria is said to be the prettiest of them. Maria Rizal, the great grandmother of Gemma, and you have Josepa, the bachelor, the single, one of the two singles who never got married, and then you have Trinidad. Trinidad looks also beautiful here. And then you have Doña Teodora, and then you have the nieces. You have Matilde, you have Angelica Lopez. Look, I think she's a very young teenager, but she's already, this woman, a young teenager, is already an officer in the Katipunan. You have Delfina Herbosa. Here, can you see it? Also a teenager, also an officer in the Katipunan. You have Consuelo Lopez. After that, you have Adela Hidalgo. And then you have Patrocinio Herbosa. And you have, finally, you have Concepcion Herbosa and Amelia Quintero. Amelia Quintero, this one.
Sorry, excuse me. Could you point out Adela Hidalgo, please? She's my Lola.
Okay,
where is Adela Hidalgo?
Okay, remember, this is Amelia Quintero, the Lola, great Lola of Japan. This is
okay.
Herbosa. And this is Patrocinio. And this is Hidalgo, this one.
You
Dr.
sure about
Quibuyen.
that?
Ano?
Dr.
Are you sure
Quibuyen.
about
Time
that?
na?
That that's Adela Hidalgo?
Ito.
Yeah.
No, she's
Dr.
the mother of my
Quibuyen.
mother kasi.
Ito yon. Adela Hidalgo.
Yeah,
Okay.
Dr. Quibuyen. Amelia Quintero is my grandmother.
Okay. See, Amelia Quintero is
She married the eldest son of General Miguel Malvar.
yes.
Bernabe Malvar.
Yeah, so you are cousin of the multi-awarded actress Therese Malbar.
Yes, I think she's my niece.
Okay. All right. So
I noticed that their numbers. How? But the pictures there are no numbers on the pictures, right? So how do you know who's who?
how do I know who's who? You have to trust me.
Okay.
It will take time to explain it. My goodness. But this is arranged. These arranged numbers, no. I can tell that from the way they look. You know. For example, this the prettiest one obviously is Maria Rizal. And the youngest one is Amelia Quintero. She's the youngest, and you can see she's very young here. You
While
know?
me, Concepcion Herbosa, we lived with her until she was 96 years old. I think this is her, not this
Okay.
one. This one is Concepcion Herbosa.
Okay.
This one
That's
is
why I don't know.
Filipina.
Do the others know who Adela is here for sure?
Wait, let's not get bogged down into this. We'll settle
Okay,
this
sorry.
later, no?
Maybe
Let me just
later
finish
on
my.
you could let us know.
Okay, let's just let's settle this later. Of course, I will defer to your judgment if you correct me here. I don't have any problem with that. But one thing I will just assert here is that the youngest looking here is Amelia Quintero. And this is Trining, this is Sepa, this is Maria. Okay? And so let's move on. I may be mistaken, and I'll defer to your judgment. So you have the final say, of course, because you're the relatives. Anyway, I just want to show this. It's a very touching picture. It's a matriarchal family. It's a family composed of women. You know, Rizal grew up in a family surrounded by women. And I think anthropological, psychological studies, by the way, that's also one of the things that I've studied and taught, anthropology and psychology, are now have established a link between growing up in a matriarchal family, matrilineal family that is led by women. And they have established a connection between that. If you're a male, you grow up in that household, especially if that household is a loving, kind household. You will grow up to be a very kind and loving person. And that explains Rizal, you know. And that is true of practically all matrilineal societies. They produce men who are kind. As against patriarchal societies that produce men who are warlike and violent, you know. Just to give this a context, that Rizal grew up in a predominantly female household of loving women, not you know, loving women of purpose and integrity, and that is what he imbibed. Okay, and now I will fast forward now because I'm running out of time. I just want to show you that Paciano had conferred with Mabini before Mabini joined Aguinaldo. And I'll fast forward it to June 2, 1898. Now, this is a person who suffered, whose family suffered, got destroyed, in fact, by the Dominicans and the Spanish military forces. And now, June 2, 1898, the situation has reversed. You know the saying, gulong ng palad, you know. The Spanish command, Paciano succeeds in defeating the Spanish forces. This is never celebrated. Not in film, not on stage, not on TV, not in the movies. But look at the situation here. Here is a person who went through the horror of the Calamba agrarian dispute, whose family was utterly destroyed. In fact, were ejected and, displaced. They ended up in Tondo. And here he is now, triumphant over the Spaniards. He won the battle in Calamba, and the Spanish commander surrenders to him and begs him, actually, please spare our lives. Spare the lives of these friars, because only they can vouch for me, because I might be court-martialed for surrendering to you when I report to the authorities in Intramuros. And they are the only ones, the friars are the only ones who can speak for me and who probably will save my life, because he was sure he would be court-martialed for surrendering. And the answer of Paciano, okay, I will not touch even the money that they own. They can keep it. The Dominicans can keep the money. I can release them. They can go back to Intramuros. I will also release you. But just tell everyone and tell the commander and tell the friars that I know that they are behind the execution of my brother. He actually said this. This is documented. He suspects that the Dominicans and the other friars conspired to have Jose Rizal executed. Well, that's an old story, because that's what they did to Father Burgos, Gomez, and Zamora. Anyway, again, Father Schumacher and other Jesuit scholars will scold me for this, but I'm reporting the point of view of Paciano and Rizal and the other Ilustrados, and I'm taking their side as against the side of the Jesuits and the Dominicans. Okay, now Paciano is captured, Aguinaldo is captured. Paciano refuses to take the oath of allegiance. Aguinaldo takes the oath of allegiance. He becomes the darling of the Americans. He's rewarded with 1,000 hectares. But Paciano does not stop there. He forms a coalition of farmers from Laguna, Bulacan, Cavite for the redistribution of friar lands to Filipino farmers. The lawyer of the junta is Cayetano Arellano. Paciano is elected president. But nothing happens because, well, the Americans bought the friar lands based on the Friar Lands Act of number 1120. The purchase of about 164,000 to 128 hectares of land in Laguna, Bulacan, Cavite, Bataan, Cebu, Rizal, Isabela, Mindoro. These are all haciendas for the aggregate sum of 7,239,784 and 60 centavos. Calamba hacienda was 16,424. And you can imagine the size. Quezon City is 16,820 hectares. So nothing, well, instead of distributing the land to the farmers as asked for the junta by the Junta de Agricultores, led by Paciano, what do the Americans do? They sell the land to the highest bidder. And who end up owning the land? The American corporations and the richest Filipinos. So farmers got nothing. Well, now you have the Philippine Assembly in 1907, headed by Filipinos. The heroism of Rizal is recognized, and they approach Doña Teodora and says, we would like to offer you a lifetime pension of 200 pesos a month. At that time, if you adjust this by inflation, by the inflation rate, that will probably be equivalent to 20,000 pesos today, 20,000 pesos. So they, in effect, Teodoro Alonso was being offered a pension of 20,000 a month. What was Teodoro's answer? Again, this is documented.
Thank you for your kindness and generosity, but the results have not been patriotic for money. That is Chudora. But the ending of Chudora is very sad because you see the old Chudora. She was very old here, and you see how loving he holds, caresses, in fact, the skull of Rizal. That's the skull of Rizal, and he was taking a photo of her was taken. Here is the mother caressing lovingly the skull of her beloved Rizal. And she died in 1911. It was, a large funeral. The Governor General, the legislature, chief men of the islands attending, and all public business being suspended by proclamation for that day. So it was a huge funeral procession. And in the case of Rizal, well, he was duly honored, Jose Rizal, in the monument was unveiled in 1913. And Paciano was one of the members of the committee, but I don't think he showed up. There is no record that Paciano showed up in the funeral. Now, he died, well, this is the case of Aguinaldo. Aguinaldo was fated by the Americans. He became an American boy. He is the first Filipino to ride an airplane. So he's flanked by 2 American pilots here. And he has the distinction being the first Filipino to ride an airplane. And this is the photograph. I just took a snapshot of this. This is displayed in the Manila International Airport. I think this is now the Ninoy International Airport. I don't know if it's still there, but it's a photo of Aguinaldo flanked by 2 generals. What about Paciano? Well, he died on the 13th of April, 1930. Do you know that that was a Palm Sunday? And it was a full moon. He died in the dawn of March 13, 1930. And this is the Philippine Herald news obituary. His passing was marked by no countrywide lamentations, no 1-minute silence in prayer, no funeral panegyrics. The man passed away as quietly as he had lived. Now you can tell now what Paciano's contribution was, but this is my question. No biographies except one written by, and a very incomplete, inaccurate one written by a Brazilian doctor of medicine, pathologist by the name of Jorge Miklos Bom. That's the only thing written about Paciano by a foreigner, a Brazilian. Nothing else. No play, no TV episode, no film in his honor, and no monument except the monument in his own backyard in Los Baños. He has been forgotten. And so that was my motivation in writing a script that the Tanghalang Pilipino produced into a film for cinema that was premiered in Cinemalaya in 2020. It was entered as a non-competition film because the organizers of the Cinemalaya and CPP were affiliated. So to avoid any accusations of bias or favoritism, they entered it as a non-commercial, non-competition film. And that is what I would like to show to you now. Let's watch the movie. And after that, let's listen to the reaction of the representative from the Rizal clan, Gemma. And then we can have the
excuse me, Floro.
Yep.
I don't think we have time for the video. It's already past 7.
Oi, sorry about that. Sorry,
I think we'll just
anyway.
We'll just do away with the video, and we just hear from Gemma about her reaction to your lecture.
Okay, can I just announce to everyone that actually they can go to YouTube and click General Rizal, and they can watch it from YouTube.
Yeah. Thank you.
or maybe Floro, June,
Yep.
may I just state this? Or maybe Knights of Rizal Aloha chapter can create a special show time for that so
Yeah.
that we can, yeah, and then probably we can invite you for some reactions and a little bit more information, and others can
Oh,
give it.
I'd be thank you for that suggestion, Raymond. I'd be happy for to do that.
Yeah, we'll just schedule it separately. We'd like to share that with others.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Floro. Um, well, we have a reactor to Floro's lecture. So I would like to introduce her. She is the great grandniece of Dr. Jose Rizal, the great granddaughter of actually of the hero's elder sister Maria, and of course she is also popularly known as the first Filipina to win the Miss International Beauty title in 1964. Um, she is a graduate of Maynooth College and has worked as a journalist, writing a weekly column in the Manila Bulletin on Philippine history, politics, and other topics. She has written several books, among them Rizal's True Love. She was a former director of the National Museum. When martial law was declared, however, her family was harassed for political reasons, and she fled to Mexico with her children and lived there for 18 years, working at the Centro de Estudios Económicos y Sociales del Tercer Mundo, and then with the United Nations Development Program in Mexico. She returned to the Philippines and became Secretary of Tourism and Vice Chair of the Manila Historical and Heritage Commission. She's the Chairman Emeritus of the Heritage Conservation Society, a lifetime member of the Philippine Historical Association, the Philippines National Historical Society, and the Museum Volunteers of the Philippines. She is married to Antonio Araneta, with whom she has two children, Fatima and Leon, and of course, grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Please welcome Ms. Gemma Cruz Araneta.
All right. Good afternoon to Floro and to Mr. Colmenares and everyone in the webinar, especially my Rizal relatives. I am going to make very short and very broad comments. First of all, I would like to tell our speaker, Floro, that whenever I hear him, his lectures are very mind-boggling and heart-rending. That's because for him, the past is alive, and he connects this with the present, and which of course will help us figure out the future. All right. He has also decolonized our history because what he teaches us is history from the eyes of the natives. No, history in the context of our economic, political, and social development. Now I can understand why many years ago Teodoro Agoncillo said that Philippine history starts in 1872, that before that there's no history of the Philippines, but history of Spain in the Philippines. And that's why in his book, Revolt of Masses, he cut the Spanish colonial period to only 3 chapters because he said that's not the history of the Philippines. And I also understand, after listening to Floro's very detailed account of the Hacienda de Calamba, it's not an incident, the Hacienda de Calamba problem. Now I understand why Saide, the title of his textbook was Philippine History for Catholic Schools. I could really never understand why our history book in school had that title. So now I understand they did not want us to know what the Dominicans really did to Rizal, not only to his family, but to the rest of the Filipinos. Now, I also heard that Congress or the Senate, they are initiating a review of the Rizal law. As you all know, this is the teaching of the works of Rizal in the Philippine schools in an obligatory fashion. So I think we should have an eye on what they are going to do in this review of the Rizal law, especially Floro and the Knights of Rizal, because we have to make sure that when they review the Rizal law, they are going to do it in the style of Floro Quibuyen, right? So that's it. Those are my comments. Thank you very much for decolonizing our minds, Dr. Kibuyen.
Can I respond quickly to Gemma, June?
Yeah, sure.
Gemma, thank you for the reaction. I just want to add something to what you said, and I think it's something, it's cause for concern. In fact, I'm beginning to worry because you said the Congress now wants to review the Rizal law. Do you know
Yes.
that happened before? That has happened before. Sometime in the 1980s, there was a move to abolish the Rizal course.
Oh my gosh.
In other words, there was a move to make it no longer compulsory.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons they were citing was Constantino, saying that what's the point of
Mhm.
studying someone who actually was against the revolution and favored Hispanization. And the only reason why that did not push through was because the teachers of Rizal at that time, this happened before I went to Hawaii, and before the downfall of, I think it happened after the downfall of Marcos. I'm not exactly sure of the dates now, but I think it happened sometime in the 80s. The teachers of Rizal, the Rizal course, united against it. Now, I'm worried that now that you mention it for the first time, I heard it from you for the first time, because I know for a fact that they have done away with the history course
Yes.
in high school. Now,
Unfortunately.
to me, that is absurd because if you look at other countries, they have a regular course on history in high school.
Yes.
In Australia, my daughter went through Australian primary school and secondary school. And even as early as grade school, they were required to study Australian history. In high school, they were required to study Australian history and European history, and a choice, an option between European history and American history. In the United States, I know for a fact that American history is a required course in high school. So I find it absurd and dangerous to remove history, but they have succeeded. Now, the fact that they have succeeded in removing history in high school, I have no qualm. I am very worried, and probably my fears will turn out to be correct, that their next attempt will be to do away with Rizal. Now, why do I say that they will do away with Rizal? You know why? Because Rizal is the only way now you can teach a radical version of history.
Yeah.
You remove that, and the whole history will depend now on what the friars want you to know. Everything is censored. You know, I don't understand, for example, when I wrote about the Calambasian, the case, all I did was to cite the facts and to present the point of view of Paciano. And what was the reaction of Schumacher, a Jesuit, who I did not even criticize? In fact, Rizal did not even criticize the Jesuits regarding the Paciano, the Calambasian case. Schumacher scolded me for saying that in my book. And the same thing happened in UST. They didn't like me for saying that in my book. Now they are passing the story, promoted no less by well-known Filipino historians, that Rizal retracted based on a document that somebody from the National Historical Institute presented, saying that it was written by a neutral person, a guard, a guard who was one of the guards for Santiago, an affidavit. But that kind of affidavit can be a form affidavit. All that they need to do is to sign. It could have been drafted by somebody else. The same thing happened in the retraction of Rizal. In the beginning, there was a form document. All that Rizal had to do was to sign it, but the test was already there. Now, in this case, how do I know that it never happened, that the retraction never happened, and the marriage never happened? Because the last time Josephine went to the Pitan was in December 29. She never went back for two reasons. One is she had to leave with Paciano early in the morning on December 30. How can she go back for a marriage when they had to prepare and they had to be... If she did that, she won't be able to leave for Cavite. They had to do it very surreptitiously. They could be arrested and apprehended. So they had to do it late, you know, in the dark of early morning, maybe probably 4 o'clock. They had to leave to go to Cavite. How can she be in Port Santiago to get married at dawn before Rizal's execution when in fact she was supposed to leave for Cavite? And she did. And what is the proof of that? Santiago Alvarez wrote a memoir saying that she did arrive the three of them, Trining, Josephine, and Paciano arrived. And that's the reason why Bonifacio got hold of the original document. And Bonifacio was the first to translate the document in Tagalog. So she never went back. Number two, by the testimony of Jose Asinero, the grandfather of George, in his memoir, which is unpublished, by the way, he says explicitly, I was with the family, with Josephine the whole night. There could have been no way Josephine could go back and get married to Rizal.
Yeah.
So this is another falsehood that is being perpetrated by no less than the National Historical Institute and a very famous historian who actually has declared support for this theory. And I did not intervene because at that time I did not want to be seen to be disrupting his lecture. And but the reason is, one, George Asiniero's grandfather says that he was with Josephine the whole night. Two, Josephine left Manila surreptitiously to go to Cavite. They had to do it surreptitiously because otherwise they would get arrested. Remember that Paciano was already tortured in Cavite, in Port Santiago. He's already a wanted man. He was already a marked man. He could not just circulate anywhere freely. And Josephine was obviously you can tell that she was Caucasian if she moved around, and she was obviously well known as the partner of Rizal, entering Rizal. How could they go back to Port Santiago? They had to leave early morning. Now that is another falsehood that is being spread now, no less by the National Historical Institute. And I have to speak up against this because I know that the next target of the government and the legislature is to do away with the Rizal law. They have done it before, but they didn't succeed. This is the second time they're trying it. I think it will disappear. This is the only course where you can allow teachers to speak up about the reality of Spanish colonialism. You take this away, then the next generation will never know what Philippine history is unless
then we will be back to Philippine history for Catholic schools.
Exactly. And look, all the people who know about this, myself, George Senior, we are now old. I'm 74 years old.
I'm older than you.
But the young historians now are propagating these myths again. This idea that we have retracted.
Yes, and Professor Quibuyen, you're very right. The National Historical Commission supports that idea. But you know, even from my grand aunt, who was even present during the time at Fort Santiago, there's no retraction. And you know, my grand aunt was a very devout Catholic until she died at age 96. And I always question my grandfather, are you sure that he didn't retract? Because I was, of course, at that time studying in a Catholic school. So I was very worried that, you know, a relative of mine, Jose Rizal, is not a Catholic. But they would maintain that he never retracted. And I told that to Professor Xiao Chan, Xiao Chan.
Chao Chua.
Yes.
Xiao Chua.
Yeah, because he has this grand tour at Rizal Park, and that's his last line that he retracted. I said that's impossible. He did not, because otherwise, if it's true he retracted and he married Josephine Bracken, then that would mean that Josephine Bracken would have been the heir of Rizal's properties. But no, she didn't get anything because she wasn't married to him. It
May we
was
hear
the
from
mother and the sisters who inherited the assets, and Paciano, of course.
May we hear from
And then,
George?
besides Tess, if he retracted, that means all his writings during his lifetime are just pulp paper.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a
May
fact.
we
Rizal was a stubborn person. He would
Di
never
ba?
get back what he says. I mean, I think even
Oo.
the descendants
He
now
had
are
nothing
saying
to
his
retract because
character.
he didn't lose faith in God. If that's what they want to know.
may we hear from
About
George
believing in
Aseniero,
God,
please?
he still did. But he really didn't retract. And I'm sorry to say that maybe it's the Jesuits and the Dominicans who wanted to propagate that idea. But it's
Sorry.
a revising history.
Sorry.
Okay, let's listen to
May we
George.
hear from George? George, please
Wala,
unmute.
George,
George.
you're muted. You're muted, George.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we hear you now.
Good. Well, fantastic, Floro. Great lecture. And I think the emphasis here is that it was the entire Rizal family that was heroic in this struggle. And you've given a very good homage to them in their patriotism, in their self-sacrifice, in their support for their son. So it was the entire Rizal family. And that was very clear. The second, it's very clear that this whole pseudo debate, this false dichotomy between this Rizal Bonifacio debate, which was totally ridiculous, is totally dispensed by your talk about how, in fact, the Rizal family was so imbricated right from the beginning with the Katipunan. Now, finally, I would just like to give some historiographical sources for your contention that there was no retraction. And there are three sources that I would link one to the other to, in a sense, reconstruct the flow of events of that fateful day. The first is Austin Craig's book. You know, Austin Craig wrote his book in 1920. There was an earlier version, so he was doing his research, let's just say, almost the moment he arrived in the Philippines. And he was one of the homicides, you know, who arrived in 1901, 1902. And I'm sure that he got to talk with a lot of people, all of them at that time living, who knew Rizal, and so he knew what he was talking about. In his book, he says that on the night of the 29th, the eve of the execution, Josephine Bracken and Trinidad retreated to her lodging. You know, so Josephine was living separately from the Rizal family. She had her own boarding house. And Craig says that Josephine retreated to her boarding house with Trinidad and the Dapitan schoolboy. He does not mention the name of my grandfather. He just says the Dapitan schoolboy. Earlier on, he said that the Dapitan schoolboy was brought to Manila by Dr. Rizal when he left Dapitan, along with three other boys. So that's that Dapitan schoolboy was my grandfather. And Craig says that night, you can imagine their emotional state, but one of them remembered, oh, he said something about the lamp. And so they opened the lamp, nothing there until they saw that it was thick, very tightly clipped to the pavelo of the lamp. And they flicked it away, and there it was, the poem. So Craig says that the Dapitan schoolboy spent the whole night making copies of the poem. And my grandfather says in his memoir, which is really not a memoir, but more like a testimony to his family, to his children. It's addressed to his grandchildren. He says that by morning he had memorized the poem because he just kept on making copies of that. And these copies were sent to various people. So the second historiographical source is what my grandfather says. He says that very early that morning, he went to Fort Santiago. He went, he said, no? Singular. I went to Fort Santiago. And when I saw my teacher being marched out of Fort Santiago to the sound of drums, I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I ran away. Always he was saying I. He wasn't saying we. He said I. Ran away until I took hold of myself and I said, what I am running away for? And so he turned around and walked back very fast, just in time to see the execution of his teacher. Now, very important. Why is he saying I? Why was he not saying we? Right? And when he went to Fort Santiago and he said, I saw my teacher being marched out, he didn't say, I saw Josephine. He didn't say, I saw Trinidad. What you can reduce the Jews is that he left them very early that morning to go to Fort Santiago by himself. And so the third historiographical source that I will cite is what Floro has already mentioned with the Santiago Alvarez book on the revolution, where he says that that afternoon of the 30th, Josephine and Trinidad and Paciano arrived at Cavite with the poem of Rizal. So string together these three historiographical sources, Craig, Asenero, Alvarez. It's one continuous flow of events from the eve of the 29th to the afternoon of the 30th. And through that, you cannot find a slot where you can say, here was what happened with these people. Asenero would have been the first to say that, when he was running away, he could have said, I was going to look for Josephine. I mean, she was nothing. So that is what I would say is a very, historiographically founded reconstruction of events. All those other testimonies that we find, they are all like photocopies of the same format that had been prepared by someone else. That photocopied format, of course, there was no photocopy, but it was spread around. The journalists published the same thing. It was telegraphed to Madrid, who published the same thing. There were differences in the words. There were not exact copies, but it's the same format. And that was what was supposed to have been discovered by NHI when they looked at this report of this soldier, which was exactly the same. They all copied from the original. And who wrote the original? I would say that it was Father Balaguer. Because if you look at all the testimonies of all the people who were with Rizal in the last hours of his life, it was only Balaguer who said that he was with Rizal that very moment when he signed the retraction. So we don't have anybody else except Balaguer to say that at the moment of retraction. Everything else is secondary, following what he said, following what Balaguer said. And therefore, for me, the whole source of this whole thing is Father Balaguer. All the others, Villa Clara, the other Jesuits, I will not say that they were lying. I will say that they were all believing what Balaguer said. They all wanted to believe that. And hearing it from Balaguer was just what exactly they wanted to hear. So I'm not saying that there was a Jesuit conspiracy, everybody was lying, everybody was fabricating. I think there was only one person responsible for this, and that was Balaguer. And he fooled everybody because everybody wanted to be fooled. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
George.
you, George. Well, I'm sorry, but we're running out of time. So I would like to cut short the Q&A portion of the lecture. And I would like to thank Sir Dr. Quibuyen for a very interesting, very educational lecture. And I would like also to thank our distinguished reactor for her comments.
Thank
So it is
you.
our hope that this has given us a better understanding of the role that Paciano played actually in the life of Dr. Jose Rizal. And we hope that through this lecture, we were able to get a better understanding of who our national hero is. So this ends our first lecture in part 2 of the Rizalian Lectures series, sponsored by the Knights of Rizal Aloha chapter. Tune in for the next Zoom lecture, which we will be announcing soon. Until then, mahalo and aloha to all of you. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Maraming
Thank
salamat.
you. Bye-bye.
Daghang
Thank you
salamat,
all.
Floro.
Thank you all.
Okay.